Hearing with the town board, Thursday, February 14th. Time is 7:29. Call to order, ordinance change amending section 5-1-1 through 5-1-18, as well as 16-1-4, and fee schedule regarding ambulance service charges. Notice of discussion and possible action. Notice is hereby given that on February 14th, 2013 at 6:30, at the Town Hall of the Town of Waukesha Board will consider the adoption of proposed amendments to Town Ordinance 5-5-1 through 5-1-17 and 6-1-4, and adoption of newly created Town Ordinance 5-1-18 and new fee schedule regarding ambulance service charges. Section 5-1-1 regarding Town Board authority concerning fire protection, including the authority to charge fees for fire and rescue department services, and the power to amend the fee schedule. Section 5-1-2 regarding Town Board authority concerning ambulance service and related fees. Section 5-1-17 regarding Town authority to charge for ambulance and rescue related services. Section 16-1-4 regarding miscellaneous fees, including ambulance fees. Section 5-1-18 regarding reimbursement and charges for calls made for fire and rescue services. And Appendix A, a newly created fee schedule for fire and rescue services. So, I know, Joe, you've been doing a lot of work on this particular issue with Clerk Jamie and, of course, Attorney Hofer. Would you like to provide an overview?
Sure. Basically, what these ordinances do is they revisit our fees for ambulance services and fire services with regards to what's commonly known as a crash crew. When we go out on a car accident, as an example, we currently typically get no money for those services unless we transport a patient. The ordinance 5-1-18, which is a new ordinance, creates the ability for us to charge the owner of each vehicle, as long as they are not a town resident, for the services that we provide, which includes a per vehicle fee. So if it's a 3-car accident, we're allowed to charge up to $500 per vehicle. We also have an itemization for materials such as oil dry. If we end up using our fancy new extrication equipment, we get to charge for that. And I think what's important there is that these fees in 5-1-18 are for non-resident people driving through, don't live here, they don't pay any of our tax money. We supply them services and they go on their way. So that particular fee is really one that we should be able to see significant dollars, easily $30,000 to $40,000 a year of increased revenue coming into the fire department for those services. When you look at the other fees, the fee schedule we're currently operating under was last updated in 2005. I worked with the Three Rivers Billing, who handles all of the billing, not only for our community, but for many others. And we created a model which is certainly not the highest for the municipalities that they collect, but brings into line with the other area communities fees that are being charged. Those fees are variable based on resident and non-resident. We maintain the disparity between a charge for a resident and a non-resident. So those fees are there. It also brings in some itemization, things like oxygen, different medications that might be distributed and used on that ambulance. Where we don't charge in some cases for those, we would now be able to charge for those medications and services, and in some cases we're just updating a cost for those services. So that's kind of an overview. We had to change many ordinances to accomplish this. In some cases we had ambulance fees next to dog licenses, which is something that we felt wasn't appropriate. So we ended up creating an Appendix A, which is one of the items here, which would allow these services to be isolated because they should be updated more than once every 8 or 9 years. We should be looking at these as cost of services and goods change. easily the most expensive area that the town provides for its taxpayers. And when you look at the equipment that we have today, the upcoming needs that we have, it's important to look at the revenue to reconcile to meet those needs. So that's, I'll go into a 3-hour presentation of what each subtle change is, and it gives you more than the flavor.
All right, so questions from the audience related to the ordinance change that's proposed, ordinance changes, I should say, that are proposed. And Jill, you're going to field these questions with Attorney Hofer? Okay. Name and address for the clerk, please.
Excuse me. Beth Needling, S46W25390, Meadowview Court West. So I guess my only question is, will there be the no transport fees for just any non-residents? Or will there always be non-transport fees for anyone, like with EMS calls or anything like that?
The EMS calls, we are putting in a non-transport fee.
Okay.
Those are there for residents and non-residents.
Okay.
So this is a 911 call kind of thing. The ambulance hits the street and we show up, and as an example, it's a diabetic scenario where you give them some orange juice and things start coming back into line and there's no
Sure.
reason to transport.
Okay.
There's a fee that's eligible to be collected. The fee for residents, $250, for non-residents, $450.
Okay.
We have the right, and I just want
Sure.
to take you all the way to the end of that. If a resident finds that that is an overbearing fee and they have a hardship, they have a right to send a letter, and Three Rivers Billing will coach them, for lack of a better word, about that situation. They will then present that back to the board. They do not make that decision. The board makes that decision at that time. If the board feels that the hardship is there, the board has the right to waive that fee. So it can be a zero, but we do have a fee involved in that non-transport fees.
And is that only if the fire department does any, anything medical? If they simply, no?
It's, if they dial the phone,
Okay.
and we all show up,
Okay.
the fee's
Then
gonna
there's
get
the fee.
filled out, and again, if they have, this was something that Michelle at Three Rivers and I talked at great lengths about, you know, because there are a decent number of calls that there aren't service. I mean, you get there and the diabetic's a great example of it.
Right.
You know, and that's something, that's a policy decision on whether or not that fee should be applied at that time. We have costs. I mean, when you went out on the call or whomever, there were fees that were incurred by the town, so we do have costs. If the town board at that time wants to waive those fees for that particular individual, unfortunately, they do have to fill out a little
Sure.
letter and say, hey, I got a problem with that. And then that's a policy decision for the sitting board at that time to make that call, whether or not they want to enforce that particular fee in that
Sure.
area. You know, Johnny dials 911 because he's 3 years old and we show
Right.
up, that might not be a
Right.
fee that somebody wants to collect.
Okay, so then someone can, even if they don't necessarily have a financial hardship.
Correct.
I guess one of my concerns is that people call the fire department, for something as simple as, my husband fell, we're in our 80s, I just needed help getting him up. But my concern is that if they get that bill for $250, she's gonna think twice about calling us, or calling for help. And then that gentleman's gonna lay on the floor for, all evening. He'll say, give me a blanket, give me a pillow, maybe I'll feel better in the morning. And when he doesn't, then you have a resident of the town who's in far worse medical shape than he would have been if we would have gone that evening and picked him up off the floor. So I guess that's my concern. I mean, I completely understand, for the diabetics, for things where there's actual medical care given, but some of the things, again, as simple as a lift assist, I just have the concern that they're going to think twice about even calling us, and then it's going to put the people of the town at more of a medical risk, or, a higher risk for more medical issues.
Correct.
When they call maybe 12 hours later.
And a lot of those and seniors will fall into Medicare, Medicaid categories, and the billing process for them is significantly different. If
Okay.
you don't transport, we really can't create a fee
Okay.
to them.
Okay.
Because Medicare, Medicaid is not going to pay us just because we show up.
Okay.
So in that particular instance,
Yeah.
that, you know, Johnny fell off his swing and he might have broken his arm, he's crying, and dad panics and hits
Right.
the phone,
Right.
you know, I mean, that's gonna really happen, and what are we gonna do about that as a town? You know, and I think that that's a process, the policy itself of being able to come to the board and say, hey, you know, it's just too much of a fee for my family to handle. I think
Sure.
that speaks to the culture of living in the town,
Mhm.
that a board should be able to consider that, and that's something that was important to me when I crafted it. So we would have that ability, plus a future would have that ability.
Okay. Thank you.
Questions? Comments? Anyone address for the clerk, please?
Hi, Sandy Howell, need the address. I'm here to support the ordinance changes, and I think it's interesting what the last commenter had to say. I think we do need to be careful about people who need to call, but we also need to be concerned about people who call unnecessarily, repetitively, and, you know, I went through all 475 runs for last year, and there weren't many problems, although there were 114. Well, out of the 475, there were 275 that resulted in a charge and 258, more than half, that we didn't bill anything at all. And there were 114 runs of those that were ambulance that were coded as no transport, and so we got 0 for those. We had lockouts, people locked out of their houses or their cars, you know, we're not billing for that, and stuff like that. So, you know, I think that we need to find a balance with that, and I do support the ordinance changes. There's another proposed part of the ordinance, Ordinance 5117, item C, where it states that no charge will be made for emergency medical services to any active member of the Town of Waukesha Fire Department or Rescue Service. And my recommendation would be to increase that benefit for our firefighters by finding a way to include language that would extend that benefit to their immediate family members. And of course, we always hope and pray that they'd be blessed enough to never need it. Please consider that, and thank you for your time.
Okay, questions or comments on the ordinances? You don't want to do
You can do them there, you can do them there, you're not, whatever.
it. You do them as fire chief, but you do.
Maybe stand, maybe.
But you do have to talk into the microphone, so everybody.
5117 D. Joe, it says payments are due 90 days after billing. Interest charges are to start 60 days after billing. It seems like a little bit of a conflict. If you got 90 days to pay, why are you charging interest for the last 30 of those days? I think those two numbers should probably be the same, please be consistent. And I do echo the concerns that were brought up already about billing folks, that it may discourage them from calling emergency services if they need them. As Beth alluded to, most of our no transports are elderly people or from car accidents. Vehicle accidents, many who are out of town may be very difficult to collect from, but I think that's a worthy try. It is the elderly people and the folks that need help that may get discouraged because they can't afford us to come. They have a disability or for whatever reason they can't afford us to come. And to be discouraged from calling 911 is not good because, like she said, 12 hours later, you know, or a day later or 2 days later, we could go from somebody who just needs to be picked up and put back in their bed or sitting in their chair to somebody who's dead. I mean, that's a real possibility. So I looked at what other communities are doing for language for that particular item, and suggesting, or they're using language to the effect that there will be a no transport fee when they do treat. The city of Waukesha actually uses treat the language that they won't do a no transport fee unless they do drug interventions. Some of them use language that they will do a no transport fee only if treatment is above a basic assessment or lift assist. So we may want to think about tweaking that to include some of that language. It might make things a little more palatable to folks that can't afford to call or pay. You know, it might clear the air a little bit for that. Item 1.517, I guess maybe a little clarification on what we're going to consider a false call. Is that, you know, a pocket dial, or what are we really considering there as a false call? I don't know if we need clarification there. I agree that, same as Mr. Hom said, if there's abuse of the system, there ought to be a fee for that. I don't object to that at all. But again, I wouldn't want to deter people from making the appropriate calls either. Then I want to go to Appendix A. We have a rate in there for ALS resident calls, a rate for ALS non-resident calls, a BLS resident rate, and a BLS non-resident rate. Then, under a no transport rate for BLS resident, you have 105, and a BLS non-resident, you have 155. Those numbers seem to conflict. Is there a reason for that, or I'm not quite sure why that's like that?
That's a darn good question, Dan. Thanks for pointing that out.
And then we go a little bit further. You have ALS ambulance, BLS service, you have 455 and 505. I guess, you know, I'd want to know which one would be transported, or because I'm going to take the cheapest one.
Yeah. Well, and this fee here, this schedule here, is one that's for discussion. The ordinance actually stipulates what the transport fees are, and the ordinance would be in place. The fee schedule comes along with that. There's a resolution that each one of these fees, board members can discuss when we get to the resolution to approve these and make adjustments. These were fees that Michelle at Three Rivers was pulling from. We were trying to get averages and medians from the neighboring communities that not she, but Three Rivers bills for, to come up with some kind of a benchmark for discussion tonight. But that'll be part of the resolution that the board members will decide, hey, yeah, we, you know, do we want to itemize the medication costs? Do we not? Here's some idea of what those costs, because I got to tell you, I don't know what name any of the drugs on here are. So you know, I'm relying on our professional that's saying, hey, here's what we bill for in other communities, that here's a number, and it's a discussion point for us as a board. But the ordinance, with regard to the transport fees, the ordinance will supersede this fee schedule and be drawn from there.
I understand that completely. The other question, I had one more.
Okay.
Throughout the ordinance, you refer the fees to the schedule, but for the non-transport fees, you write that right in the ordinance. Why aren't those fees just incorporated into the schedule as well?
They could be.
Just for consistency's sake.
They certainly could be, and you know.
I think ideally too, the nice thing about having fees in an appendix as opposed to the ordinance is, if you just want to increase the fee $5, you can do so by resolution without having to go through the public hearing and doing everything else that's required of an ordinance change. So from a efficiency standpoint, the more fees you have in the appendix that can be changed by resolution, the better.
That's why I was curious why those fees were left as part of the ordinance, not pulled into the schedule.
Yeah, and we could certainly do that. That'll be something that we can discuss. I was just busy with the keys.
Okay. Anything else, Dan? Okay, thank you. Are you staying for the discussion at the board level? Were you planning on staying for the discussion at the board level? Okay. If you have opportunity. Great. All right, other questions? Name and address for the clerk, please.
Maureen German, West 240, South 4931, Highway 164. I want to tell you that I concur with what Dan and Beth say. I disagree with charging people for a non-transport. I think that you will create a real problem for people when they get in car accidents and you're trying to bill somebody for something that we didn't do. I think it's gonna create a nightmare for whoever is doing the billing, the clerk, the fire department, whoever that may be. Because they're not gonna pay it. I don't know if insurance would pay it. Has anybody checked to see if insurance would cover those costs? We don't
If you're
have to.
referring to the crash crew, there's actually a state statute that allows us to collect that. There's even a reimbursement process through the state, as long as we prove that we've attempted to collect. If it's happened on a state highway, we could actually get reimbursed from the state. So this is straight out of the state
From the
statutes.
state,
Mhm.
not from the person
I think
in the
it's
crash.
60.57. You first have to try to collect from the vehicle owner, which is what this is alluding to. And as long as you can prove that you've attempted to collect, you're unable to collect, then you can go to the state and ask for reimbursement.
Okay. Now, do we have something in place now that if it is a prank call or we go on a bonus call, that the sheriff's department or the fire department can write some kind of a citation? I don't want little Johnny to
I think we
just-
do have that in the municipal bond schedule.
We do have that already. Because I don't want little Johnny that just was at school today learning about the fire department at one of our wonderful programs that we have, thinking, I like those guys, I want to call them.
No, I think we're pretty fortunate. I haven't seen one of those citations come through municipal court, but I do believe it's in our municipal bond.
I don't want to scare the children from calling 911 or the elderly. Because we all know, most of us, that we will be recorded, they will know where that phone call came from. The elderly kind of
And
don't
again,
so much.
and in that elderly situation, the Medicare, Medicaid will not allow us unless we transport to charge a fee. So we cannot charge them hey, you dialed 911 and we showed up, and we put you in your chair and we left. We won't be able to generate a fee off of that because Medicare won't pay it.
No.
When, Dan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if we do transport an elderly, and this is one of the issues that we were trying to address here, and we put them in the rig and we do $5,000 worth of things to them to save them, we're limited as to what we can charge that patient. And that's where the cost issue, one of the cost issues comes into play, where we're allowed to charge them a $350 fixed fee, and we get some mileage charges, and we get to charge them a fixed fee for the masks and the gloves that we put on. But if we put them on oxygen and put a collar on them and all of those things, Medicare won't allow us to pay for that. If I'm correct. So, in looking at these fee schedules, it's one of the things that is there, that we do have costs that are significantly higher than even what these fees will bring in. This is not gonna be, hey, we're running a net zero number. These fees aren't, I'll just say Delafield-esque in nature. If you look at our fee schedule that I proposed versus Delafield, we're still on the cheap end of services. So we were sensitive, I was trying to be sensitive to that, but the Medicare patient, Medicaid patient, clearly their fees are going to be the same as they are today.
And what about the people within their insurance companies?
With their insurance companies?
Yeah, people that don't have Medicare.
Well,
What are we gonna run into?
sure.
They're not gonna pay for
Last
that.
year, well, in 2011, when you look at the write-off, we billed just shy of $103,000. We collected $73,000 in fees. The rest of those dollars are written off. And where that write-off comes into, 50% of our clientele, if you will, were Medicare. We had 31% were commercial insured. 3% were Medicaid. We had 16% that were self-paying. Do we have the likelihood of not collecting on those self-pays? Sure. And that's gonna be represented in some of the write-offs that we end up taking just because you bill them and that they just don't pay, you know?
Well, I know like with my mother, she's on Lifeline. Thank goodness I have the paramedics in the city of Waukesha because they have injured her home 3 times. One time was she pushed her button, she fell on the floor, she wouldn't answer Lifeline, but they could hear her breathing, so they called the paramedics. That's first thing that they have to do. And they got there and they helped her up, and I got there and she says, now I wanna go to the doctor, but I don't want the paramedics to take me. Well, Medicare would not have paid that bill.
That's correct.
But fortunately, when the 2 times she did need it otherwise, she was transported. I have no problem paying that bill, but I would have a definite problem if they didn't transport. Because the fire department is also here as a service, and the paramedics are a service. They are paid by our tax dollars. Thank you very much.
Judy Fuller, P.O. Box 709, Waukesha, Wisconsin. Just a point of clarification. Are you saying resident or are you saying taxpayer? Because as an owner of vacant land in the town, if I'm out trimming my trees and I, klutz and hurt myself, right now I live in the town, but next week I might not. But as an owner of land in the town, the clarification, is it resident or is it resident and or taxpayer?
The ordinance provides solution to that problem, both in the auto crash portion, as well as the regular ordinance. You would have the ability to come in if there was a question about your residency and provide proof of residency to the clerk, provides documentation as to what that is, proof of the lease, photo ID that shows that at the time that the incident occurred, you were resident. Everybody gets a date issued, photo ID from the state kind of thing, so you could say, hey, it happened on the 12th, this ID says the 13th, you weren't resident at that time, you were the day after. So the clerk has the ability to make that determination if there was a question. Typically in a medical situation, you're trying to get, if they're coherent, right, they're getting some ID and information as to where they live and who they are. That would be potentially part of the report, I would guess, right?
You're
It's a
missing the
little
point.
different than what she's
You're
asking.
missing the point. My point is, I own vacant land. If I'm hurt on it, and I'm a taxpayer to the town of Waukesha, the way it's worded, as I heard it, it says resident.
Right.
It should be resident and or taxpayer because you're denying me service as a tax-paying entity. So it should be listed as a resident and or taxpayer. And right, that's not what I'm hearing, and I would like to have that clarified, because otherwise I'm being taxed and not being provided the same service as if I live there, or I rent it. And as a taxpayer, I'm a taxpayer. So I would like the board, town, plan commission, whomever's making this decision, I'd like to have that wording changed to include taxpayer,
Property owner?
property owner. Yes. However you want to word
Which,
it. But-
again, I think that
But I'm a
in the-
resident,
I
sometimes I'm a
totally understand
resident.
what you're saying. The directive that's given to the clerk, if she can prove that you were a property owner,
But that's not what's said, that's not how it's worded.
The-
It says resident, that means I live in a house or a apartment. It does not say, I own vacant land, I fell down, sprained my ankle, had to call the police, fire department. It says resident, and that is different when you own vacant land. So it would need to be property owner, but you can't put it as property owner because somebody could be renting and technically they're a resident but not a property owner, so.
You could just define resident to include property owners within the town of Waukesha too.
Thank you.
All right, other questions, comments? Questions or comments?
I just have a quick question. If something happens, Lori, sorry. If something happens that, they don't pay this bill, and you say that they can come in and everything else, and they don't pay this bill, we had to write off so much money, are you gonna add it on people's tax bills? Are you gonna add it on their tax bill?
You mean on the individual residence tax
Right.
bill, so they own the property? We're not bill collectors, so if Three Rivers Billing, whatever process that they're legally allowed to,
Hold on, let's put it on, what's the
So-
process that,
We're currently using, Jamie.
if an outstanding, they could, depending on where, if they do not pay it by tax time, they could be placed on the bill.
did we have anybody have that happen last year? That you're aware of?
I'm not aware of.
The current provisions, so I guess it depends on review.
They have been placed on the bill. I've seen them.
I disagree with that also.
Okay. Any other questions? Any other comments? Ordinance changes for ambulance fees? Going once? Going twice? All right.